I'm Geoffrey Smith, Susquehanna River Biologist for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, and in this presentation we're going to talk about riverine black bass fisheries. Riverine black bass fisheries are popular across the Commonwealth. These fall into three major categories. Free-flowing rivers and warm water streams are the most numerous in Pennsylvania, and as a result likely see the bulk of the angler effort. Impounded rivers are also important fisheries, and these would include the lock and dam systems in the western rivers in Pennsylvania, and the hydropower impoundments of the lower Susquehanna River. And last but not least would be the tidal rivers and streams in the southeastern part of the state. Each of these provides unique habitats and as such have different black bass species that make up these fisheries. These include largemouth bass, spotted bass, and smallmouth bass. Largemouth bass is the most popular and widely introduced sport fish in North America. Native to the Ohio and Great Lakes ranges in Pennsylvania, it has been introduced far and wide, including the Susquehanna, Delaware, and Potomac drainages of Pennsylvania. As far as riverine species go, it is our least abundant river species, but does occur to varying degrees in our river systems, but is more abundant in the Delaware estuary and impounded river reaches. The Pennsylvania record was an 11-pound 3-ounce largemouth bass caught by Donald Shade at Birch Run Reservoir, Adams County in 1983. And the world record is a tie between two 22-pound 4-ounce largemouth bass caught by George Perry in Georgia and Manabu Kurita in Japan. Spotted bass are the lesser known of the black basses and a smaller and more riverine species than the largemouth bass they resemble. They can be differentiated from largemouth bass by a tooth patch on their tongue, a smaller mouth, a more fused spiny and rayed dorsal fin, a more irregular lateral line stripe, especially on the caudal peduncle, and more black coloration below that lateral line stripe. They are native to the Ohio drainage in Pennsylvania, and as you can see from the map in the lower left-hand corner, they reside in the river systems in the southwestern part of the state. We currently don't recognize a state record for spotted bass in Pennsylvania, but the world record spotted bass weighed 11 pounds 4 ounces and was caught by Nick Dulick in California in 2017. Smallmouth bass are the most abundant and widely distributed of our riverine black bass species. They were native to the Ohio and Great Lakes drainages in Pennsylvania and were introduced into the Delaware River and Susquehanna River in 1869 or 1870, where they have since flourished. By looking at the map in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the clustering of collection points generally follows river courses, demonstrating their preference for these habitats. Unlike the other two species, smallmouth bass are generally brownish in coloration instead of green and lack a dark lateral line stripe, but instead have a series of dark vertical bars like this fish you see in the lower right. The iris of smallmouth bass is generally red to maroon and varies seasonally, with the iris of male smallmouth bass getting brilliant red during the spawning period. The state record smallmouth bass weighed 8 pounds 8 ounces and was caught by Robert Steelman in Scotts Run Lake, Berks County in 1997. The world record smallmouth bass weighed 11 pounds 15 ounces and was caught by David Hayes in Dale Hollow Reservoir, Tennessee in 1955. We monitor riverine black bass populations in different ways in Pennsylvania depending on the life stage we are targeting and the water body type. One life stage we look at is young leaguer bass, which are spawned in the spring of each year and assessed in the midsummer. We conduct these surveys along the shoreline using backpack electrofishers and in some non-wadable areas like the Three Rivers, boat electrofishers. These surveys utilize density measurements, most commonly fish per 300 meters of shoreline, to attempt to relate to future year class strength. Since 2005, these surveys have also been used to track occurrence and prevalence of disease among young of year bass after high rates of disease in the Susquehanna River Basin were noted. The other life stage that we monitor is adult bass, and this is what you commonly see in our web reports and other products. In order to survey adults, we utilize boat electrofishers, most commonly at night, taking advantage of fish behavior when they come into shallows to forage. In warm water streams, we utilize small boat electrofishers and towboats or tow barges during daylight hours to monitor these populations. From these populations, we generally collect data on abundance, like frequency distributions, and age, which we use to track growth rates and mortality rates. We monitor several riverine black bass populations statewide, typically on an annual basis if conditions allow. Surveys cover the upper, middle, and lower Susquehanna River, the lower West Branch Susquehanna River, the upper and lower Juniata River, the non-tidal Delaware River, and the upper Allegheny River. The lock and dam stretches of the three rivers in western Pennsylvania are surveyed using an IBI-style survey in conjunction with the other states in the Ohio River Basin. Nearly all riverine black bass populations in Pennsylvania are regulated by Commonwealth Inland Waters regulations. These include a January 1 to mid-April, an October 1st to December 31st trophy season with a minimum length limit of 15 inches and a daily accrual limit of 4 bass, a mid-April to mid-June catch and release season where tournaments are prohibited, and a mid-June to September 30th general season with a minimum length limit of 12 inches and a daily accrual limit of 6 bass. However, there are some exceptions. The middle and lower Susquehanna River and lower Juniata River are currently regulated under a miscellaneous special regulation for catch and release only. The Conowingo Pool of the Susquehanna River is managed cooperatively with Maryland DNR, and Delaware River and Estuary, which includes the tidal tributaries, are managed in conjunction with New York and New Jersey. Be sure to consult with the Fishing Summary and Boating Handbook for details on each of these regulations. In Pennsylvania, we are fortunate to have a few unique riverine bass fisheries. One of the more prominent is the tidal Delaware River and Estuary. This is a combination of main stem river and tidal creeks. These areas have wide daily tidal swings, 6 to 8 feet in some locations, that also create strong currents. You can fish for largemouth bass among the urban industrial setting in downtown Philadelphia and shorelines of the suburban creeks. Another unique riverine bass fishery is the Susquehanna River, regarded by many as the preeminent smallmouth bass fishery in the East, if not the country. People come from far and wide to target smallmouth bass here. A quick search of social media will find posts and videos by celebrities and professional anglers coming to the Susquehanna to fish for smallmouth bass. The immense size of the river, more than a mile wide in places, and the complex habitat make it an ideal place to fish for smallmouth bass and an ideal place for smallmouth bass to live. The wide, shallow characteristics of the Susquehanna make it usable for all types of anglers. It can be waded, kayaked, or boated. While the abundance of smallmouth bass in the Susquehanna River makes it popular, the real draw is the opportunity for large fish. Smallmouth bass over 15 inches and 18 inches are relatively common, with opportunities for 20-plus inch fish, albeit rare. Several biologist counterparts of mine from other states routinely come to the Susquehanna to target bass. On 2 separate occasions, the eyes of the bass fishing world have been on Pennsylvania rivers. The 35th Bassmaster Classic was held on the Three Rivers in Pittsburgh in 2005. And in 2014, a Bassmaster Elite event was held on the Delaware River in Philadelphia. Both events drew huge crowds of interested onlookers and put a spotlight on Pennsylvania riverine bass fisheries. The Best Fishing Waters section of our webpage identifies the best places to target riverine smallmouth bass in Pennsylvania based on the electrofishing catch rate of fish 15 inches and longer in our surveys. These include the upper portion of the Allegheny River from Portage Creek to the Pennsylvania line, and again from the Kinzua Dam downstream to Lock and Dam 9. The Clarion River from Little Toby Creek downstream of Mill Creek, French Creek from Union City Dam to the mouth, the Juniata River from Raystown Branch to the mouth. The upper portion of this reach has high abundance, and lower reaches have a lower relative abundance, but the catch rate of larger fish is higher. The Susquehanna River between Sunbury and Holtwood Dam, and the lower reaches of the Youghiogheny River from Indian Creek to the mouth. While the following may not qualify as best fishing waters, they are still great places to target riverine bass populations based on the recommendations of our area fisheries managers. Many of these have high abundance of bass, but because of the characteristics of the water body, just may not support high numbers of large fish. There are several sites here that have high abundance of bass, such as the upper Susquehanna River or North Branch, which may be the best fishery in the state in terms of abundance, but does not support high numbers of large fish. Pine Creek, Lycoming Creek, and Sherman Creek are other bass fisheries I'd recommend from personal experience. In addition to routine monitoring for management purposes, riverine bass populations have been the subject of extensive research in recent years in Pennsylvania. This work was initiated as a result of the disease-related mortality of young year smallmouth bass and population declines in the Susquehanna River. As a result, this population has become one of the most intensively studied bass populations in the United States. We'll highlight a few of these projects that have angler interest or are well known. One of these research projects was an investigation into the potential impacts of largemouth bass virus on smallmouth bass in a laboratory setting. Largemouth bass virus was a common pathogen isolated from 6 smallmouth bass, but had not been found to impact smallmouth bass, nor were the typical signs of largemouth bass virus infection seen in smallmouth bass. A project done in conjunction with Michigan State University and funded by Pennsylvania Sea Grant and Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection exposed young year smallmouth bass to strains of largemouth bass virus isolated from smallmouth bass from the Susquehanna River Basin in a lab to see what happened. They found that smallmouth bass could, in fact, be subject to the pathogen, and it could result in large-scale mortality, especially when other pathogens were present. The signs of disease were different than those observed in largemouth bass and resembled those observed in the Susquehanna River. Strains isolated from fish from the Susquehanna River were more virulent than other areas, including the Allegheny River in the western part of the state. This finding has implications for other populations to the north with climate change, where increases in water temperature will more frequently overlap the optimal range for virus replication. Another research project answers the most common question I probably receive. What are the black spots I see in the bass? The condition in question is called melanosis and is commonly referred to as blotchy bass syndrome. It is not unique to this area and has been documented across North America from as early as the 1980s. There has been wide speculation among biologists and anglers as to the cause, with most assuming water quality, but follow-up studies have all been inconclusive. What is occurring is the aggregation of melanocytes, or dark pigmented cells, accumulating in the skin of the bass. The condition does not appear overtly harmful to the fish and can vary from a few small light spots to large dark areas like seen in this picture in the lower right. Collaborators from U.S. Geological Survey have recently used new molecular analytical techniques to look at the affected cells of the fish and found that the tissues affected contained a novel adenovirus, while cells of unaffected areas and unaffected fish did not have detectable levels of the virus. This suggests that the accumulation of the cells is in response to a virus. Ongoing research will try to better understand spatial and temporal patterns of melanistic activity in bass. One of the most interesting and important research projects that has been done was a study by Megan Kepler-Shaw from Penn State University looking at seasonal movement patterns of smallmouth bass using radiotelemetry. This project was done in collaboration with a number of different agencies as well as a bass club, who also provided fish for the study and kept an eye out for tagged bass. It focused on a stretch of the West Branch Susquehanna River and large tributaries Bugle Creek and Pine Creek. It found that there were large-scale seasonal movements including spawning runs up tributaries, some over 20 miles, with nearly all fish moving back to the river after spawning. There was another large movement period in the fall to select areas where large numbers of fish would overwinter. Once spring arrived, the fish would all leave the wintering habitat and move back to the spawning areas that they had used the previous year. She found that the average annual movement of bass in this reach was 16 miles, with one bass moving as much as 73 miles. This movement research also lines up with my tip for anglers targeting riverine bass, especially smallmouth bass. Factor these seasonal movements into your fishing patterns. Where the fish are in April is different than where they are in May and June, which is different than where they are in November, and so on. Understanding where each of these specific areas are and the demands or needs of these fish at these specific times will improve your fishing. This pattern of movement will be similar for all riverine bass populations, but will vary among each unique water body. Moving around and figuring them out will put you at a distinct advantage. For instance, overwintering bass want to expend as little energy as possible, as well as their metabolism has slowed. They search out the slowest, deepest water possible. Similarly, if you're fishing for them, you want to present them the slowest presentation possible because there's a cost-benefit relationship with each meal this time of the year. These habitats are often well known to anglers, and if you recognize the characteristics, you can find other out-of-the-way areas that are equally as good and potentially better. Conversely, post-spawn fish, especially females, are trying to replenish your reserves after spawning. You'll often find females in strong current or on the edge of strong current during this time of the year, using it as a conveyor belt to bring them large amounts of food with little energy expenditure. Males at this time of year are not feeding, only guarding nests from invaders. In searching for these feeding females, you may find yourself with a lot of water yourself, catching big, hungry fish. Another biologist tip for riverine bass fishing is understanding diet. If you typically fish lakes and ponds for largemouth bass, the tackle you want to utilize will be different because their diets are much different. Over the years of handling thousands of smallmouth bass, as well as dissecting others for fish health research, crayfish make up an overwhelming portion of their diet. That's not to say they don't feed on other things like fish and other invertebrates like Dobsonfly larvae or hellgrammites, but crayfish are the most abundant prey item in rivers and streams where there is cobble boulder substrate. So if you want to put the odds in your favor, utilize a tackle that looks like the food they eat the most. This could be jigs or tubes that are pulled slowly along the bottom in a hopping fashion, much like a fleeing crayfish would do. You also should adjust your tackle seasonally because they're still opportunistic, so it's important to understand a little bit about the behaviors of other potential prey items. I mentioned crayfish, and while they may be a staple, it can vary. For one, there are large portions of the year when crayfish are dormant and not readily available for bass. There are also periods of the year when crayfish molt, typically twice a year, when their ability to move is limited, so they seek cover more, but those that don't are easy meals. Also, there are periods of time when fish like minnows, darters, or other species are more active due to spawning or migration or some other facet of their life history that makes them prime dinner options. Knowing the timing and characteristics of those can also help increase your catch rates. Please submit your questions regarding riverine bass in written form to the panel as instructed. Thank you for your attention and your interest.